Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Mobile Strategy for Retail, Moving Beyond Consumer Apps. My name is Adam Bookman, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Just a few housekeeping items before we get going. First, this webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and the slides will be made available after the presentation. Secondly, if you have questions at any time for us during this webinar, please ask them using the chat or QA panels in your WebEx environment. And also, we encourage you to follow at Propelix on Twitter to keep up with our content that we constantly update on our website, including webinars such as this. Before I hand it over to Eric, I would like to give you a little bit of background on Propelix for those of you who are new to us. Propelix creates mobile strategies and world-class apps for the enterprise. We're headquartered in San Jose with offices in Boston and in Pittsburgh. We primarily do work in the United States, although we go with our clients globally and have executed mobile strategies across the world. We're 100% focused on mobile for the enterprise. This is all we do. You can see some of our clients there, and there are a number of our clients on the call today, so I'd like to give a shout out to them and thank them very much for attending our webinar today. Just a little bit about what we do. Propelix offers services in 3 different areas. The most common way folks get started with us is a workshop in our mobile strategy, in one of our mobile strategy offerings. We offer mobile strategy on both the business side and on the technology side. For business teams, we help them define their mobile app portfolios. We help companies look at how does mobile fit into our overall company strategy? How do we ensure that we're not just building one-off mobile apps, that we have a plan for mobile across the organization? How do we know where to begin with mobile? What part of the business should we begin in, and which app should we begin with? We do a lot of work with IT teams as well. We have a very popular offering called IT Readiness for Mobile. And in that offering, we work with technology teams to ensure that, one, they understand where the business is at in terms of their plans for mobile, and then ensure that they have a roadmap to get ready for mobile within their organization. And that's both on the infrastructure side as well as on the application development side, spanning areas like mobile device management, bring your own device, policy creation, security, encryption, wireless, and networking, and then on application development, spanning areas like skill sets that you need for application development, mobile application development platforms, testing tools for mobile, SDLC processes for mobile, mobile support, and many other areas, and kind of bringing that all together in an overall roadmap to ensure that you're ready for the wave of mobile. We also offer services in an advisory capacity. We do a lot of executive education and speaking engagements, and we have core mobile application development services, and one of the most popular offerings here is our rapid app prototyping, which is an awesome engagement in a very short period of time of 1 to 2 weeks. We're able to build for you, take an idea from the back of a napkin to a working app, a prototyped app on a phone or on a tablet. And those visualizations are great, and they solidify the idea of mobile and what's possible with mobile in the minds of end users, both business and technology alike. That being said, those are the end of our sales slides. I'm going to be back at the end to moderate some questions for Eric and to review a special offer for you for attending this webinar. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Carlson. Eric is a partner and co-founder at Propelix. He's a seasoned leader with a keen eye for emerging technologies. He's well respected in both business and technical circles due to his ability to match up the right amount of technology geekiness with business understanding to craft truly unique solutions. Eric has a ton of experience in the retail space, and he wants to talk to you about some of the work that we've done with our retail clients and what we're seeing in retail. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Hi, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Like Adam said, my name is Eric Carlson. I'm very excited to talk about this topic with the folks on the call today. We have a great cross-section of large and smaller retailers on the phone, both clients as well as some folks that we've talked to in the past. Today I want to talk a little bit around market trends and some objectives that we're seeing for retailers today within mobile. I'm going to definitely talk about some effective use cases that we are either building or planning for some of our clients in this area, and we'll touch a little bit around how to quickly establish a mobile strategy, since we think there's a tremendous amount of demand within this area. I think for us, we clearly see how mobile will create a fundamental shift in how retailers run their business, both in terms of how consumers interact with those retailers, which we've already seen and which I think folks in this call have already been a part of, but also directly related to how we interact with our consumers both in store and away from store. And we've gone through, obviously, we've gone through a few different shifts in here. The early days in terms of having a small shopkeeper, having a one-to-one relationship with consumers, small stores, small number of SKUs, very personal recommendations, and obviously that early day kind of one-to-one relationship changed into a much more larger scale self-service retailing, where even within a smaller footprint, it's almost a mini warehouse of product choice. And that decision-making shift changed from a shopkeeper or from somebody who was a steward for those products really to the consumer. And retailers, we saw a tremendous amount of efficiencies in there and taking more of a passive role in that product selection. We just created a lot of choice for consumers, try to identify and find placements of items and understand those paths of those shoppers, helped us dictate lift. We use coupons to be able to drive specific types of areas that we want to be able to see and be able to do some A/B testing around those types of things. But overall, we've seen less and less consumer interaction in store. And that has had a real impact, I think, now that mobile has become a much larger impact on what we sell and how we sell it. And we're seeing retailers take more of an active retailing type of shift. And this term is not ours. This term is a little bit more industry. But how we really feel those objectives are changing is with our clients, we're trying to identify methods for three primary areas within retailing. We're trying to identify methods for how technology, whether that be mobile or not, provide a better understanding of what consumers want as they come through that door. So how do we understand what are these consumers, if we have a relationship with them, what have they looked at in the past, what have they looked for online, what types of searches are being produced, and do we have a better understanding, at least at a high level, of what consumers are looking for as they walk in the front door. How do we work with that to provide sales associates with the ability to use any corporate available information we have on that individual to better assist these customers when they can't find those items? And thirdly, how do we ensure that store layout, the placement of products, the flow throughout retail stores, and any sort of behind-the-scenes services are in direct alignment with how customers quickly find and buy and, frankly, leave that retail environment. So milling about in stores has been seen. Clearly, there's a lot of back and forth in this area, but milling about and trying to be able to find items has been shown to increase basket size, but also increases consumer angst in terms of not wanting to repeatedly go back into a specific retailer because it's viewed as an ordeal. And so how do we use technology to really go after these three major components? And we think mobility has a direct component into all three of these, and really the best way of delivering some technology in these areas. And so as a retailer, how do we really leverage this channel? And how do we move beyond just some of the things that we've seen in the industry? So I know that this webinar is really geared towards, we said, really moving beyond consumer apps, which make you think that we're going to focus primarily on the areas in orange, and we are. But I did want to talk about this first bullet in terms of providing a better understanding of what consumers want as they come through that door. The consumer focus of this and the consumer app and the consumer mobile app type of idea is not new. It's something that really, I think, with the iOS SDK and the App Store creation in 2008, retailers have been finding different types of methods to be able to bring that as a valuable channel. But we clearly know that mobile is changing how consumers interact with retailers, both in-store and not, and I'm sure everybody in this call has seen this. This mobile use and how we use mobile devices will constantly accelerate. This is from a global stats just from this month, or I'm sorry, in May of this year, and just overall kind of internet traffic from a mobile perspective as a percentage of overall internet traffic. And when you start thinking about 15% of mobile traffic, being a small number, it's actually quite amazing. When you think about the small amount of bite-sized information that's handling via mobile device, the amount of large internet traffic there is in terms of streaming and much larger types of things that require data. And even ComScore released something yesterday that they had some results from Q1 of 2013 that 48% of Americans' time online in March was via a mobile device. So when you think about half of time being spent online, even though it's only a 15% amount of market share when it comes to internet traffic, it's pretty incredible. Google had a recent study around just looking at what shoppers are using when they're standing in the aisles. And so these methods of interaction are changing. So before, kind of pre-mobile, you had a consumer who was either coming in from the street and having a preconceived notion of what types of product they're buying from some other type of fashion, or they've done some research, a way to understand price, or they are, being able to talk to a specific associate in store to be able to better understand the product or the pricing. Today, people bring up their phone. The first thing they're doing is 82% of these folks are finding search engines to identify if this is the best price on here, and identify product information and what's the right thing for me. You can see how that quickly drops off in terms of store websites, brand websites, and store apps being about, I think it was 18% of might be a tool that some shoppers use to be able to do that. And so this shift is growing. The shift that a third of shoppers will use their smartphones to find information, not just pricing. I mean, we're talking about product information or best product for me, and we'll use the search engine to be able to identify that versus asking the person who is in the aisle from the organization, from the store itself. And that's pretty fundamental when it comes down to it. And so we're seeing a lot of retailers really reboot how they're thinking about consumer-based apps. I think the rush to app delivery and having something in the store and building M.dot sites created a pretty poor representation of the brand and the experience that retailers were trying to have. I told before about M.dot showing a much higher e-commerce usage. So even from that same ComScore discussion before, that in 2013 in Q1, 11% of all retail e-commerce was via a mobile device, whereas 8% last year at the same quarter. And there's a huge discrepancy between M.dot and native applications. Obviously, you guys might be seeing this as well, that M.dot sites are driving much, much more e-commerce usage versus kind of native app development. And so there's a lot of conversation that we're having with organizations around what is the strategic alignment of M.dot or native app to our in-store strategy. Are we trying to change or differentiate our customers by using native or M.dot? Are we trying to change their experience and make it maybe based on loyalty? What is the role of a native application when it comes to using if I'm a consumer? Is that native application even important while I'm standing in store? How do we start turning this, smartphone search and the showrooming into an advantage for us in some sort of way? And honestly, the last piece is why would why a consumer actually use it? And so this app reboot, we're starting to see some repeatable use cases coming out of our clients and prospects in terms of what they're thinking. And a lot of those, frankly, are self-service thinking, back to our second model before. They're trying to, give consumers a way to navigate in-store and find items quickly. Trying to help them build shopping lists away from stores so they have a reason to get into the application and kind of mark things off from a big box retailer type of perspective. A lot of areas around mobile coupons, finding ways to be able to deliver this items forward. We talked about, as a key to loyalty rewards program, so getting rid of my plastic dongle and using my cell phone to have a barcode or someone else to be able to identify my loyalty information so I'm not carrying more things with me. Gift registry creation is a big deal now, where I can walk around the store and scan items to be able to add to a gift registry, or as a consumer to be able to fulfill that. Self-checkout, mobile wallet, I think we're getting there. Obviously there's retailers that's really more appropriate for. Obviously Apple leading the way a little bit in the self-checkout type of piece. Mobile wallet, that's almost a whole other webinar in terms of where we are in a maturity with that. But those withstanding, we're also seeing some active retailer thinking coming up as well. And so using those mobile applications in store, are there any ways to be able to use my online persona and my browsing and my interest history that I might be looking at M.dot to produce more in-store recommendations or incentives? So an example of that might be I'm pulling some basket information from an M.dot site. I walk into that retail store, and I'm using that basket information to maybe produce an incentive on site for that consumer based on my browsing history in a different channel. We've had talks around consumer paths in store and being able to use a mobile device not individual down to an individual level, but at least at a group level to watch how individuals move throughout the store and talk more about store layout and some of those other types of areas we talked about before. But honestly, is this enough to build a rewarding in-store experience? And there's there enough reason here to be able to really find methods for using those consumer-based apps in-store? And so this is not the point of this webinar, but this is a lot of areas that we're talking a lot internally and trying to work with our clients around. So this is really more of a to be continued. Let's talk about the reason that we're supposed to be here, and that is talking more around beyond the consumer-based application. And this idea around how do we better provide store associates to be used and actually provide some available information to assist customers. And also this last bullet around layout and placement and kind of reducing burden behind the scenes. There's a book you guys might have read, In the Mind of the Shopper by Herb Sorensen, and Herb has a lot of really great quantitative items in here around retail movement and exposure and other types of things. He's got a great graph in there around, I think this is 1,000 or 2,000 individuals. This is more of a big box retailer, but being able to look at what type of stimulus actually impacted buying patterns. And when I think about walking around a store, you know, you can see this is the stimulus here on the left being an end aisle display of, say, 1,000 people. How many of those saw that piece of display? How many times did they see that during a certain visit, and how many seconds did they actually spend with that stimulus? And there's a couple things in here that we've been focusing on that have been interesting for us, and areas that actually have been a metric for us driving mobile applications internally. And I want to talk about two specific big areas in here. The first one I want to talk about are these numbers on the bottom. So store staff, you know, only 6% of individuals interact with the store staff, but of those 6%, that second per exposure you can see is pretty much 10x anything else that they spend time with in the store. And so we really think there's some abilities here for mobile to create some opportunities for store associates to rebuild trust. Back to that area around retailers saying that 1/3 of individuals, you know, will trust a website over the associate. And when you start thinking about even the ones that interact, if only 6% are interacting with associates, there's a general divide here from the associate and what the consumer and customer has been looking for. And this is really a byproduct, frankly, of a lot of the things that we've seen in really because we've failed to arm them to be able to respond to those consumer requests. So the customer that's walking in and walking through those aisles is far more knowledgeable typically about the product because of the device in their hands than the associate that is trying to understand the benefits and detractors of maybe a store with 100,000 SKUs. And so being in this self-service model so long, I think we've neglected this channel around being able to have in-store associates be trusted. And so this first point of interaction is how do we provide store associates with the ability to use any sort of available information to assist these customers? I'm showing this Lowe's picture here, and we have some members from Lowe's on the call. Lowe's is not a Pavellix client, but they are absolutely what we're talking about when it comes around being able to break this divide. So not only ending the information divide between who I am as a customer online and in-store, but also information divide between what the associate knows about a specific area of product versus all the information that's out there about that product. But also, how do I cut that physical divide between where the associate and the consumer is standing and where that information is located? And so the Lowe's example, which I think started a few years ago, is a great example of trying to be able to get rid of that kiosk type mantra and having small areas of information in stores to be on my person and trying to remove these divides, both in terms of information delivery as well as the physicality of that. And it's a great example of mobility. And really, honestly, the only way that really changes. It's not really going to happen with embedded mobile devices such as Motorola or Intermec type of things. It really happens with a rich display that not only is appropriate for the associate, but might be appropriate for the consumer to be able to look at as well. And so some of the common use cases we're seeing in this area, you know, and things that we're building for our clients or are in their roadmap, I wanted to be able to talk about these. I'm going to do this for a couple of different roles. But clearly some areas around this idea of being a customer steward. So being able to bring product and stock information down to that device, being able to check on customer orders, regardless of what channel that is, whether that be an e-order or anything else around that. Being able to order for the customer with them, so almost like an e-com light type of thing, whether that be from another store to this store, or maybe from another store to the consumer's home, being able to assist with gift registry type items, being able to maybe sign up individuals for loyalty, anything else around being able to make that individual, that associate, a trusted advisor to that customer. And this is not an overnight change, but I know that from a Lowe's perspective, and knowing that personally, it's much different to be able to ask a question in aisle and know that I'm going to answer there, even if that answer is I need to ship it to the house or ship it store to store. At least there's an answer. We've seen a lot of things around efficiency. So mobile POS is, it's very much in the news around dumping registers and all that kind of stuff. That decision, honestly, I think is more of a store brand and it depends on the layout and the structure of the store. But line breaking is a pretty good idea and something that we're executing for our customers. So being able to hand holiday rushes or weekend type things and getting away from 2 open registers to be able to bring other store managers or their associates out to either perform that mobile PS at a separate station up in front or even in aisle is a great opportunity to be able to reduce angst from a customer perspective. Performing checkout in aisle, paperless receipts, all sorts of things around being able to build some efficiency around that. Clearly, from an associate, when I start looking more internally, how do I communicate with associates? A lot of retailers we deal with, there have been no communication channels to be able to get to an associate. Typically, for a lot of our retailers, those associates do not have Active Directory logins. They do not have store email addresses in any sort of way. Their communication is via posters in break rooms. Their communication is via maybe access to a store portal, or their communication is verbally from a store manager or somebody else. What an excellent opportunity to be able to communicate with an associate, maybe either via personal or shared type of devices. So we see a ton of this around being able to provide weekly or daily or real-time notifications. Even being able to, from an employee perspective, you see some things around self-service. I move, I want to change my address, or I want to be able to notify individuals about open enrollment. I want to be able to provide training for a new product or a new type of sales technique or a new whatever via video or via an LMS system on a mobile device that the associate can do at the register while there's nobody up there, not in the back room. And so this idea around being able to deliver that information out to the associate are some great use cases in here. And the communication piece, also like VoIP and trying to remove in-store phone systems is very popular. Trying to augment the store portal in terms of bringing some additional information from the store portal out to the associate itself, not just in a large sense. But the idea is how am I able to communicate better with that associate, where before a lot of that wasn't even a channel for us. Away from associates and away from in-aisle, I want to go back to this other piece here as well on this chart. So moving away from store staff and thinking more around some of the areas related to some of these other stimulus items. These numbers up on top really stand out, and it's not new for retailers to understand the importance of end caps or freestanding display or bins or anything else. But the amount of exposure with that and the number of times per trip that's occurring, we were starting to look at it in terms of, and a lot of our customers are trying to look at, how do we start affecting this a little bit smarter? And since it is such an effective channel, and the layout and the actual structure of the store and the product placement, how do we start looking at how mobile might be able to help us with that? And so we're really looking at ways for mobile to significantly change how we are managing and supporting the stores, away from just purely the consumer and associate interaction. And so the first area that I thought we could talk about was more around managing the store and employees themselves. So that last bullet related to ensuring the store layout, the product placement, the end cap structure, and any sort of behind-the-scenes services are directly in alignment with customers quickly and finding and buying. And so how do we make ourselves a little bit more efficient in terms of how we're acting as retailers? And I think some of our objectives in this area is to permanently be out of the back room. And so I have this miserable PC picture here, but typically we deal with a lot of retailers who have a 386 machine that's sitting in the back, chugging away on store portal type of items, and it's doing some time and attendance type of things, and it's handling in terms of inbound shipments and other types of areas. It's doing some printouts for tags, and it's back there. It's got dust in the fans, and somebody from a retail perspective is sitting in the back room and doing some work on that device. So how do we get store management and even district management and those types of things out of that back room and onto the floor? And the other piece is since those other areas above in terms of those displays and the usage and the analytics coming out of the importance of store layout and structure, how are we ensuring that we're able to efficiently support these support processes, which is kind of where we group these up to, and how to reduce a ton of non-value add tasks? We found, we think retail is one of those areas that we see a tremendous amount of really older paper-based processes that have they're important, but not necessarily value add to the point where there's something I just need to do every week that's important somewhere, but not necessarily showing any real uplift in terms of how efficient we are or even revenue coming in per store. And so the first group that we wanted to look at was really related to store management. And from a store management perspective, we find that we're building and identifying use cases in a few different areas. The first one is just ensuring that a store is meeting its objectives. And so, how do we do and how are we delivering end cap and shelf layout type areas, maybe seasonal changeovers, augmented reality in terms of those areas, which I'll talk about here in a second. Audits is a huge area, and overall quality assurance, quality control type of areas. So an example of that is typically we see, when store shifts occur, we see a lot of printout drawings. We see maybe some pictures occasionally. We see a lot of text related to in a store portal in terms of changes that need to occur. And we're starting to be a little bit more graphic about that in terms of sharing images related to proper end cap and shelf layout, even doing augmented reality to overlay what my current shelf layout looks like on top of something that it's supposed to look like and identify differences. Trying to ensure that there's some QA and QC around that. So we've even done things in terms of stores sending back shelf layout type of things to ensure from a corporate perspective that we have compliance around those areas, which can be extremely important, especially around seasonals and other types of things where we see a tremendous amount of lift. Audits, we're going to come back a few times. There is so much wasted time that we feel around audits, and we'll talk about that even more here in a couple minutes about the types of audits in there. Store managers, clearly mobile PS and line breaking in terms of hopping in and making sure that we're moving customers through the process. Visibility to customer requests. So not only being able to see that we talked about that associate app that might be doing lookups, but how can I even be able to view to see what lookups are occurring on those associate apps and be able to see that from a store management perspective to either help out, or if an associate is looking for help, instead of leaving the customer and walking somewhere to try to find somebody or bringing up a phone, how do I even while I'm looking for that, request help and allow a store manager to identify that somebody needs help in doing a notification to a mobile device? And overall communication. So how do I communicate with staff in store, or maybe up to a district manager, or maybe to corporate? We've seen a lot of things around finding people for open shifts. So if somebody cancels, how do I communicate out to individuals that might be available to pick up a shift? Manager to employee alerts, things such as safety. There's a safety issue in store, and we want to be able to do a lockdown of some sort. We want to be able to deliver that typically through other channels, maybe over broadcast, but maybe also the mobile devices. We have a closure due to weather, other types of things where I want to be able to do easy notifications out to employees. Again, back to the associate, might have not too many communication options there. And also employee. So, as we bring associates on, going through that onboarding process and letting them do I-9s and other types of things on the device, maybe some training, maybe some certification work that's more sporadic, but finding ways to be able to, again, not have a training occur on some PC in the back office where it's just something I'm doing for 4 hours, but maybe I can run the register during slow hours, do some training there as well, do some other types of things related to communication, but still be able to handle customer requests. So some great valuable use cases in here. And that audit thing, I want to give you an example of that. So one of our clients has, as most retailers do, have a ton of different audits. And this was more of a management-based audit that, with typical type things, being able to identify cleanliness, being able to look at status of items in the parking lot, in the store, broken fixtures, lighting, bathrooms, just typical type of audit type of things. This original audit app was not an app. It was a piece of paper that was printed out, a two-pager, and district managers or store managers would carry on bundles of these things because they go do multiple store visits a week. And there's an audit process in terms of kind of what path they took during that. And the utilization was awful. They would bring up the paper. They would check off a couple things. You might not be able to read the writing, or they would just kind of give a half response to certain types of items. After they completed, it would sit in their bag until they're able to fax. So you might have a month's worth of audits backing up, and then somebody finally would fax in 400 pages. On the back end, somebody actually had to read that and try to type in and understand what was going on. So there was a lot of, hey, what does this mean? And I don't know since that was 3 weeks ago type of thing. And so Family Dollar took it in-house to app the process. And so the version 1, they performed and really built this format in a mobile app. And it was very surprising to find out that the utilization was even less than the paper counterpart. Because the mobile app itself is not just another screen. It's not just a way to be able to access a poorly designed process. It's a way to be able to really think about what we're actually trying to achieve. And so we took this over and we did some enhancements. We really thought about the user experience and what are they actually doing and how do we want to be able to capture that. We want to use GPS and image. GPS clearly because they want to look up store information. How can we just locate where they are? And number 2, and also time and date stamp when that audit was occurred, but also do some image capture. It's very difficult to say that there's a loose tile and it's the 4th one over. I take a picture in relation to where the tile is with an end cap. It's very easy for me to understand how to be able to create an action item to fix that. And also the differences in status. So instead of starting this process from day 1 every time, I'm starting with a blank form, just show me what I did last time. The last time I was in the audit, what changed during that point? And that miserable utilization went to 85% utilization, and even creating that data now, since the actual utilization up and the data is so actionable, now I have a significant amount of uptick in terms of store ops engagements. And so when you start looking at how I'm going to look at this process, the beautification and building something elegant to sit on top of audit, how do I quickly move through in terms of a summary and be able to submit and be able to view those action items, once you start respecting that user time and respecting the process of what we're trying to do, it's amazing how well this process has changed. And so now this store visit type of audit is changing into a wide variety of different types of things. So both in terms of quickly, you can see some of these middle areas in colors that's showing a trend history, being able to add comments, being able to identify and attach pictures, being able to quickly check off in a specific area to show that something is passed. So kind of continuing with that district management idea is we're also seeing a great amount of uplift in district management type of areas or kind of a more regional or even executive management. So both in terms of if I'm managing a bunch of different stores across a wide geography, I might want just to have a good store inspector. What hours they open, who are my contacts at that store, where's the location and mapping, what services does that store offer, what's the overall status maybe in terms of just availability. Looking at analytics, visibility to staffing maybe some store performance dashboards, those audit actions that I just talked about in the Family Dollar example. Maybe some store objectives. I want to be able to look at some auditing and compliance related areas within here. And there's a whole detail around a lot of multiple different areas available within auditing and compliance within here. Communication to staff and maybe up to corporate, employee, maybe associate and store management onboarding, some training, some certifications, and just better usage of time and information. And again, there's a tremendous amount of paper-based processes that we're seeing in here. Here, we are just getting started. Like these are just some of the small areas in terms of direct related to stores when it comes to retail. We had a lot of also conversations and a lot of strategy and things that are being built even far beyond that. Looking at store specialists, we have a lot of specialists that we deal with in different stores that might have very specific audits, maybe food safety or specific areas of safety. Store communication, maybe coordinating visits with those specialists. We do a lot with store development and real estate. So real estate, being able to have individuals who are looking at regional or doing site surveys, sharing and annotating CAD drawings with maybe store developments or with contractors. Store development, we're building something called Store in a Box. So meaning having a store development resource that has a single dashboard in terms of looking at program management, being able to do scheduling and communication with vendors, being able to do annotation on CAD drawings back and forth, doing photo capture for issues and for concerns, doing fixtures, maybe ordering changes in the field while I'm on the construction site. Great stuff. Merchandising, going even farther back, in-store QC, we see that. Merchandisers want to be able to go in-store when they're also responsible for manufacturing, quality control products that are in store, maybe doing some status reporting, doing store visit reports on QC, some market basket pricing, walking into a competitor and doing some pricing related to what our competitors' pricing are and capturing that for the merchandising back end, doing some vendor contacts and being able to understand who we have, and even beyond that, looking at LP, negative transactions out in the field, doing field audits, pool point adjustments. We do a lot of things related to audio and video recording of loss prevention cases, identifying alarm activity, accessing in-store cameras, and even backwards between that, manufacturing and QA, a lot of our retailers do, a lot of process management, audit, QA, QC, and frankly, that's a whole other webinar that we're putting together right now. And even looking backwards between their distribution centers, logistics, business continuity planning within retail storing, product development, supply chain, great amounts of stuff within HR and finance, simple things such as expense management and some of the other things I talked about in HR around open enrollment or customer self-service, or even doing checks or being able to capture employee feedback and surveys and a whole bunch of other types of things. I mean, if your eyes are swimming, so are ours, because there really are for our clients and some of our prospects, we see a tremendous amount of value in these. And a lot of these are not just, thinking about taking current processes and bring them to another screen. I think that thinking only gets you so far. Our thinking is, how do I take current processes that are developed around the fact that they are not available in my pocket 24 hours a day, and how do I rethink how we want to capture and what information is important to capture and when we're asking to capture that data or present that data, and building very elegant interfaces to reduce complexity, to break or destroy process, and to think much smarter about what we're actually trying to get. And so that other screen approach, if that strategy is built around the idea of just taking current processes and bringing them to mobile devices, I would really think very cautiously about that, and back to my Family Dollar example, and think much more around what are we actually trying to achieve when it's in the field, and how do we go about doing that. So for us, we help our organizations and our clients go about this in a pretty logical and stepwise type of approach. There's just a tremendous opportunity here, and when you start thinking about the different types of actors, whether those are in store or whether those are supporting, whether those processes are directly touching the consumer, or we're just better manipulating store to be able to have a better experience for our consumer, I think it has to start with those metrics. And so a lot of our clients, I think some of our biggest challenges are, what are the most important metrics we want to change, and where do we think the opportunity lies in changing some of those types of metrics. And so we do a lot of work in terms of some of those business drivers type of those discussions, some areas around market opportunity, but also starting to think really around what types of use cases do we think are valuable, how do we look at the risk associated to those, and start doing a little bit around innovation through visualization. So I just want to spend a couple minutes on this, and whether or not this process is appropriate for you or not, I think just the thought process and how you guys bring some of these ideas forward and start going after them might be valuable on your own mobile strategies. But for us, these strategies start with some of the areas around this vision and this business context. The first piece for us is to really get an accurate view, and that means day in the life. And so tailing an associate for a couple days, tailing a district manager, tailing somebody who's a store specialist, tailing somebody in merchandising as they're visiting stores or going out to vendors, is by far the most important data that we've ever received. I mean, it's just a great way to really understand not only just the time as a benefit and looking after the benefit of trying to save time, but really what other types of core metrics could we impact via mobile. We look around the metrics. So what is that associate experience? How do we change that? How are we going to measure that change? Can we simplify the business model? Can we look at customer efficiency in terms of their time in store and how we're trying to change that efficiency? Is there some things around, maybe supply chain is another example that we've seen in terms of metrics coming up in terms of the response time related to in-store changes. Looking more at innovation, are there things within mobile that we can do that would be disruptive in the industry and be able to change how we're communicating with those consumers on site? reviewing some of the market trends, being able to look at some innovation specific to retail. And honestly, from a retailer perspective, there's a lot of great innovation occurring in other areas. Financial services is a good example, both in bank or in a banking location. Manufacturing, there's great examples around audit and QC. Pharmaceuticals, there's great examples around access to back office data that we can bring from other industries that might be appropriate for your organization. And also, we want to identify what that influence and that innovation influence kind of bubble. Who really are we trying to impact first? Is it employee focused? Is it more distributor facing? We do a lot with suppliers. Is it leadership? Is it partners? Or is it, as a primary area? Are we really looking more as a customer via that associate channel? What are those areas of influence that we're trying to go after? And really trying to define those metrics that we're trying to be able to change. We do a lot of work with our clients around identification. So getting away from just documentation of scenarios to really do some ideation, get up and get the blood working a little bit, do those store visits at a group, start thinking about store simplification of process, start thinking about elegance when it comes to customer interactions, and that wouldn't it be great if we type of conversations. And just focusing on that ideation around reduction of complexity, both in terms of data, process, etc. Trying to identify also not only those benefits, but also who are those actual actors that we're trying to influence. And so we do a process in there. And that process really is trying to be able to get us to a point where we can look at all these different types of use cases across these groups. So within merchandising or HR in this small example of a very large matrix, or associates, or other types of things when it comes to associates or district managers. What are those actors? What are those scenarios? And we're trying to identify not only how well these scenarios or these use cases might impact these core metrics that we find so important to us, but also are there areas that we're innovating in terms of process? Do we have readiness in this area? So if we made these changes, do we have the process and the data, and do our customers have the right culture, or our associates have the right culture to be able to take these types of things forward, or do we need to do work there? And lastly, frankly, is the level of effort. Are these things that are easy to do or are hard to do? And so we look across these types of areas. How well these use cases impact what we really feel is important for us as a core metric. How well are we innovating in terms of process and not just building an application that is treating it as another screen? How well are we ready internally to be able to drive this type of change? And our goal within this is to be able to start looking at scenarios and start looking at the groupings of those scenarios and the prioritization within those, understanding modules that might be appropriate from a kind of grouping of scenarios, and start thinking about applications. And so not only prioritizing the application when it comes to what application is that specifically, but also the functions within that app. So this is a client example in terms of they want to be able to build an application for an associate. We thought about customer information modules, customer ordering modules, loyalty, promotions, POS, communications. They have some communications related to VoIP, notifications, and training. All these different types of factors in terms of what's that value, what's our readiness, what's that ease of implementation, and allowed us to build a little bit of a structure through here to say, here's the areas we feel are some of the low-hanging fruit, and how do we build out from there. Mobile has to be around short implementations that we can pilot, that we can gather feedback and start building short types of phases on top of that, and really understanding where we see value. So we feel, this consumer stuff around mobile strategy was just the beginning. And honestly, as we talk more about these types of use cases with our customers and with our prospects and other types of things, the benefit that we see once in that retail environment might be a multitude X times what we're doing on the consumer side. And how we're able to change how our consumer builds trust back into our associates, A, but B, for the folks that are showrooming and who are making decisions on their own, how do we build and how do we be more efficient in terms of store layout and efficiencies to ensure that we are presenting that right information back to them at the right time and presenting the right product in the right type of manner. And so that was the large topic. Is just a kind of a tip of the iceberg in terms of the things that we're doing. So I'm hoping that was helpful. And maybe Adam, if you want to see if we have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Eric. That was That was great. For those of you on the phone, we already have a number of questions already in, and we're going to try to get to them all today. But please, if you have a question, ask it on your QA, on the QA section of this WebEx panel, and we'll try to get to it. And if we don't, we'll get to it after the call. I wanted to, before we get to some of our questions, just present a special offer. Eric talked a little bit about how you can get started, and I think one of the best ways that we've seen our retail clients get started, especially on the business side, in identifying mobile use cases and identifying areas for innovation beyond the consumer app, is with our mobile app roadmap kickstart. And this kickstart is a 1 to 2 week process. We call it Give Us a Week, We'll Build You a Strategy. But we meet with your team, we understand your priorities, and we go through the process that Eric was discussing to innovate around use cases that meet your overall corporate goals, and to identify both quick wins and where to get going, and also identify an overall plan for different user groups, both internal and maybe even external with some partners or distributors, or even extensions of your own of the consumer app you already have. And you can check out our mobile app roadmap kickstart and all of our kickstarts at propelix.com, and you can just navigate to the kickstart screen. So maybe, Eric, we can get started with a few questions. The first question comes from Chris, and he asks that, just paraphrasing the question here, you talk about a lot of different use cases. Is there a place where retailers typically get started? Have you seen some kind of recurring low-hanging fruit in multiple different retailers? And maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think not just the use cases in terms of where our customers are starting, but even focusing more on what metrics we're starting with might be a better way of answering that question. So within our customers, the back office isn't just a beautiful single database of all customer and product information that's well organized for us to go attack. And so a lot of the use cases that we've identified as being more low-hanging fruit have been items related to the business driver of time. And so that time driver, which is good but not great, but that time driver has been being able to find ways to reduce time spent in A, getting associates on the floor, getting store managers on the floor, and reducing time in the back office. B, reducing time to answer a consumer question in aisle and reducing that space breakout. Or C, reducing time just doing stuff that is pretty low value but necessary. And so those use cases have been typically related to product information or stock levels in aisle on an associate device, a shared device. They've been more focused on, frankly, the easier use cases have been more, or not easier, the more readiness use cases have been more for store management and district management in terms of being able to do things such as training and onboarding, being able to do things such as store communication, being able to reduce the time it takes to do audits, being able to reduce the time it takes to find open shifts, or being able to deal with staffing or other types of things. And so those use cases have been ones that are reliant on a single data source. They've been reliant on a process that's pretty well defined, and they've been reliant on something that we can try to reduce complexity when it comes to paper-based processes. So those have been the most common ones. Those are starts, though, and those applications will grow, and we'll get into more types of things. So it's kind of a mix of readiness in terms of able to attack time, B, readiness in terms of single source data type components or multiple source data components where there's a logical way to be able to get at that information without a whole bunch of joins across very complicated structures, and C, things that we're identifying that are reducing processes that we know are low value, and we can build some good interfaces on top of those types of things.
Great, thanks. The next question is from Justin, and that is, Around the architecture side, and I know we didn't talk too much about technology here, but from a complexity perspective, how difficult is it to, from an architecture and integration perspective, to get going with these types of use cases? And how much back-end rework is necessary before you can start thinking about mobile? Is there some rule of thumb there?
I don't know if there's necessarily a rule of thumb. I think the last answer I mentioned is partially appropriate for this one as well. From an architecture perspective, we're typically, a lot of these use cases here, both the ones I mentioned around associate and store management are typically in-store, which means that we're taking advantage sometimes of an in-store wireless system that would be secure, and we have some, even that route back to corporate is not out to the internet, so we have some control in terms of what those devices are used for and what access they have to corporate systems and those types of things. There's plenty of other use cases here, like from a DM perspective, and even a store manager that might have a personal device that's accessing some of the data that's salaried, that would be, they're more, radio-based, which means that we're finding ways to be able to understand the architecture from either a VPN or from some other type of fashion, so they have some sort of secure access into corporate systems, and we have some MDM controls clearly on the device itself. From a back office perspective, mobile is one of those areas where typically most of that interaction is web services based, and the organizations that have spent the time and have a little bit of a structure around SOA or ESB or an enterprise service bus, who might be using that for other types of interactions, are the most ready, obviously, for us to be able to maybe hook into some of those stubs for specific types of data assets. Not everyone went down that path because they didn't really see necessarily a tremendous amount of benefit when it came to more point-to-point solutions for large-scale application talking to application type of things. And so some of that data access components can be a challenge. Are we developing a web service on each of these data sources for all these items, or are we thinking more about the futures of a service-based architecture? And so we have a couple clients that now mobile is really spawning those detailed thoughts and those deeper thoughts around what we're doing around ESB. And for good reason, because this is not going anywhere. So hopefully that answered the question. I don't know if there's necessarily a slam dunk way in terms of starting when it comes to that type of architecture. It really depends on what readiness we have in those different types of data assets and what business drivers are we trying to change, and that is typically client by client.
Sure. The next question is from Samuel, and that's about the mobile app roadmap. We're just starting to generate some ideas and innovate around mobile beyond consumer. What types of roles within a retailer typically are involved in those types of sessions, and what level are those people at?
Great question. So those teams are pretty mixed. We're getting ready to start something with a large grocer, and give you an example. So we have sessions associated. We're doing some day in the life sessions that are in the field in a few different stores, and those store visits, some of those are larger, more advanced technology-based stores, and some of those are smaller market, a little bit older systems-based stores. So we're doing a few day in the lives there. I'm just going to shadow some associates and managers on that store. We're doing some day in the lives with the DMs or the district managers themselves, and so they're very mobile. They're going to go visit 2 or 3 stores and go through kind of a weekly process of what they do and some corporate-based interactions and things like that. Those users will spend some of their time and just shadow, and then we'll also bring them in when we start talking about ideation and hopefully bringing that experience forward during that ideation process. We're doing separate sessions with associates, so people just directly off the floor, with store managers, with DMs, with some of the specialists that we talked about, with some executives, and with, frankly, the core team in that is the store operations folks. So we have people who are responsible for store ops from a business as well as IT perspective that are really concurrent through all those different types of groups. There's usually a big divide in terms of what corporate feels those processes are and how they use applications and what actually happens in stores versus what actually happens in stores. And both of them are valid, and both of them need to be taken into account when it comes to really looking at the value, the readiness, and some of the level of effort when it comes to changing these types of things. So those are the types of roles that are typically involved in a mobile app roadmap for retailers.
Great. Well, thanks again, Eric, for the presentation. Hope everybody found it valuable. We do keep in mind we have the offer for a free 1-hour mobile advisory call with some of our mobile strategists. I'd be happy to do that for you. We're running up against the hour here, so I'm going to end the webinar. I want to thank everyone for your participation and hope to see you on another webinar soon. Bye.
Thanks everyone.